It is a saying amongst historians, and I think there is nothing but a lot of truth in it. And that saying goes this way: those who control the present will control the past, and they will control the future. I think there's a lot of truth in that. That's something that historians say. Back in the 1920s and 30s and 40s and 50s in this nation, America began to spawn a new set of historians. They revisited this nation's history and began to rewrite it from a different perspective. It was the beginning attempt to tell our history, to see our history, to write this nation's history from a secular point of view. Because you see, if you want to control the present, then rewrite the past so that you can control the future. And it began, this movement, in the 20s through the 50s as new historians began to write history from a different perspective. It began by taking God out of the history of the early founding of this country. The first change that was seen in the 20th century historians was to write history now from a purely economic point of view. Now, in and of itself, that's not a bad thing. After all, these colonists came to this land hoping for a better way of life. Who could argue with that or find fault with them for that? Certainly not I. So, if you teach history from an economical point of view and write the history of the founders of this nation with that perspective, there's nothing wrong with that. Attached to the Declaration of Independence were 27 grievances. Did you know that? They're right here. On the front of your bulletin is the last paragraph of the Declaration. We are so familiar with the first paragraph, but the last paragraph of the Declaration is on your bulletin, and it will be there for some 4 or 5 weeks, and then the names of all of the signers. Well, attached to the Declaration itself are 27 grievances that these founders were making against King George. 27 of them. If I were to ask you what was at the heart of their grievances, see, this is their one and only chance to declare before the King of England what they disagree with him about. So, whatever they put in these 27 grievances, you can bet that's where they put a lot of time and thought. What do you think is the most known grievance of all of the 27?
What's most known is taxation without representation.
Taxation without representation. That's number 17 grievance. Now, that wasn't a setup. I didn't ask Robert ahead of time to do that. But that's what we would all say. Well, we're familiar with taxation without representation. That's number 17. That didn't even make the top 10. And there's 27 of them. Do you know what the bulk of the grievances were about? Get off of our backs with your big government. King George was coming and he was saddling the lives of these colonists again and again and again. And they had no more freedom from him. And then when it came time for them to finally give a report and turn it into the appropriate place, England would make the report place that would receive their report almost impossible to find. They did everything they could, England did, to make the English government be a burden upon the shoulders of the colonists. And they succeeded. The main grievance that these colonists had was against the size of the government that was so on their backs. They didn't have freedom. They had come to a new country, America. They had come to here, and yet all of that burden that they thought they would leave in England came over with them. Get off of our backs. That was you can read the first 11 grievances and you're going to just see that again and again and again. Okay? Now, in light of that, when it came time then for these colonists, these signers of the Declaration, when it came time for them to begin to write their own government in the Constitution, do you think that that would be a restrictive kind of government? A government that would impose great hardship upon the people? Or would it be a government that would respect the individual and rise the worth and the value of the individual and keep the government small and off of their backs? Which way do you think they're going to go? They're going to go the latter way, aren't they? They're going to retain the freedom and the rights of the individual, and they're going to make small the government that is there to protect them and to help them out as a nation of people. It only makes sense. Had they brought over England's government and instilled that upon the people here in America, they haven't accomplished anything. All they've changed is the geography, but not the imposition of big government. Get off of our backs and get out of our lives. That was what the colonists were saying. This was the message of the founding fathers to the people of England, and particularly to the king. You see, the founders looked upon their rights and their freedoms as being ordained by God. Now, this next part is very important for us to understand. And the bigger England's government grew around the heads and hearts of these young families in the colonies, the smaller these people became as individuals. The more someone tells you what you must do, what you have to do, the less freedoms you have. We just know it works that way, doesn't it? The last thing these founders would write for themselves or write for the future generations of America would be a constitution with big government overshadowing the divine rights and freedoms of the people. The bigger government gets, the fewer the freedoms the people have. These founders knew that because they had lived under the tyranny of big government with its king. In the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s of the 20th century, historians began to rewrite American history with a secular point of view. And as people began to lose track of the faith of these founding fathers, and once that happened, then we began to forget that our rights and our freedoms as individuals aren't and cannot ever be bestowed upon us by the government, but by God alone. Forget that truth, and government will be allowed to grow to any size those who are in present power want it to become. The reason we have forgotten the founders of this nation, the reason we have forgotten that they and their wives and their children and families, the reason that we have forgotten them is because if you want to control the present, then rewrite the past so that you can now control the future. When Moses was sending the people into Israel without him, he didn't send them along with big government. He gave them God's laws and how to live with each other and even how to live with their Creator. Each family belonged to one of the 12 tribes, and the land itself was divided among the tribes. Each family was a land owner. Was this big government? Heavens, no. but the people were certainly big on God. They had what they needed in order to become a nation. When the founders gave England the Declaration and gave us our Constitution, they gave us what we needed to be a nation.